Okay, Thomas Freed here. Let's talk about the big bad United States government because it certainly is big and it's getting bad. So we go back, and in 1776, of course, they signed the Declaration of Independence, and then they fought the war, and it wasn't until 12 years later, in 1788, that they actually wrote the U.S. Constitution. So, when did government agencies appear? Let's look at it. First of all, they created the Army in 1775 under the Continental Congress, and they just kept it around. They created the Navy in the same year, 1775, and they created a Marine Corps in 1775. In addition to that, they also had created the U.S. Post Office in 1775. This is all before the Constitution is even signed. So these things, the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, and the Post Office, were all established in 1775, and those operations were inherited by the new government under the Constitution, which of course authorizes an Army, a Navy, the Marine Corps within the Navy can be constitutionally construed, and the Post Office is authorized there. So those existing operations were authorized in the Constitution to be taken over. Now, that's 1788, the Constitution is created, and the government basically consists of an Army, a Navy, a Marine Corps, a Post Office, Congress, and the Senate, and the President. Now, in 1789, they created the State Department, the Treasury Department, the Defense Department, and they started the Coast Guard in 1790, a year later, as a marine revenue service under the Treasury is how the Coast Guard was started. They charged people to come out and help you or to protect you from pirates so. That's what you had for the United States government. State Department, Treasury Department, Defense Department, Coast Guard, an Army, a Navy, a Marine Corps, and a Post Office. And that's what the federal government consisted of until 1849. In 1849, they created the Interior Department to manage the expansion westward. In 1862, they created the Agricultural Department. Now, this is in the middle of the Civil War. So what's going on here is most of the agriculture was done in the South. And when you went to Civil War, the North didn't have enough agricultural activity to take care of the Union population without the Confederate agriculture operation. So they created the Agriculture Department to manage the Union agricultural affairs so that they could feed the troops in the Army, and people in the cities also obviously had to get fed, or Lincoln would get tossed out of office for waging the war. So 1862, you get the Agricultural Department. Then in 1870, after the Civil War, you get the Justice Department. Surprise! You need a federal Justice Department to enforce the new 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments on the southern states and in certain parts of the state where they refused to admit those amendments or live under them until the federal government intervened. So, Justice Department is created in 1870. Then in 1903, they create the Commerce Department. Basically, electricity and gasoline engines are expanding commerce. They put it in place. In 1913, they put in place the Labor Department. Having had to deal with the monopolies of the era, they created the Labor Department. And in 1947, they created the Air Force, but they didn't do it with a constitutional amendment. Now, the Army and the Navy are both constitutionally authorized, but technically the Air Force isn't constitutionally authorized, and it needs to be. Now, this is the one thing we need: a constitutional amendment to authorize the Air Force. That's 1947, of course, after World War II, when it had become painfully obvious that air warfare was going to control warfare and conflict for quite some time. So, in 1965, almost 20 years later, they created HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Program that provided project housing for inner city black populations mostly. In 1967, they put in place the Transportation Department. In 1970, they started the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. That was in December under Nixon. Same thing with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Agency. That's 1970 as well. And then you have the Energy Department being created in 1977 under Jimmy Carter, when you had the oil embargo crisis in the mid-70s, 75 going forward when Carter took place. And energy and oil, gasoline prices all spiked, and it became a near national crisis. So they created the Energy Department. In 1979, they created Health and Human Services. In 1979, they also created the Education Department to basically take over and centralize public education, which is the implementation of the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto, which calls for control of the curriculum and the public schools and the public education for all children controlled by the central government. It's basically a propaganda indoctrination control of information that the population is allowed to have and is taught so that they'll believe it their whole life, all controlled by the central government. Again, that's the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto: public schools, mandatory attendance, controlled by the central government. Okay, in 1989, they created the Veterans Affairs offices because at that point the Vietnam vets had become an extremely large political problem, and they created the department to deal with that. And it's been a mess ever since because they made it a bureaucracy instead of a medical corps. Absolute idiots. So in 2002, we got Homeland Security, and in 2016, we got the Space Force, which, of course, should be part of the Air Force, not its own agency. And again, you need a constitutional amendment to authorize this kind of military expenditure, which is constant and endless and never-ending. So there you have it. In the beginning, there was nothing but the State Department, the Treasury Department, the Defense Department, the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Army, and the Post Office. So that was the extent of the government that was needed in the beginning. And all of these other departments are an overreach and an overstep of federal authority. And here's what we need to do to fix the situation, because the overwhelming bureaucracy of the federal government is beginning to mire down the ability of the country to prosper. It's becoming over-regulated by bureaucracies that have become too powerful through regulations that they promulgate in excess of the authority actually conferred by law. So they're exceeding the statutes to implement philosophy and agenda instead of actual law. And what we need to do is exactly what the Argentinian president Milieu has done since he took office, and that's slash the government. Get rid of half of these things. How can we do this efficiently? Well, here's some ideas. First, you put the Coast Guard inside the Navy. Next, you put the Space Force inside the Air Force. You put Homeland Security inside the Defense Department. Now, there's a lot of people on both sides for whether or not you still need the post office, because there are other mail services which have actually become more efficient and used to be cheaper. I'm not sure that's true anymore. My opinion is you keep the post office around because it's been here from the beginning, and mail should be a public function rather than a privatized service. It will break down and deteriorate for the poor if the government doesn't provide the mail service. So I personally am okay with the post office, and it is a constitutionally authorized operation. I'm not saying it's the most economically well-run operation, but we can fix that. It should stay. The State Department, the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Treasury Department, the Defense Department, all of the original departments stay. I think we're going to have to keep the Justice Department, unfortunately. It certainly needs to be revamped because it's been politically weaponized and politicized in its entirety under this current administration, and so much more so to the extreme than before under any other administration. It's mind-boggling. Even Nixon never pushed things this far, or Roosevelt, for that matter, during his 12 years of term. So, what do we do? Well, interior, no, you don't need an interior. The states are managing their interiors just fine. Get rid of it. Agriculture, there's no authority in the Constitution for the government to control agriculture. It's messing with the states and their rights and abilities to manage their own agricultural operations. Government has authority over interstate commerce, not agriculture. So, no, get rid of it. The Commerce Department? Yeah, right. What have they done? Congress sits around and talks about nonsense all day long. You don't need the Commerce Department. Private enterprise is doing just fine. Commerce just gets in the way and spends money and absorbs the budget. Labor Department. No, you don't need the Labor Department anymore either. The unions seem to be doing just fine representing the worker. You got 50 different sets of state laws that manage this. What's federal law going to do? Nothing. You don't need a Labor Department. The Justice Department enforces federal law. Labor Department is a waste of money. Okay, the Air Force, I said, you need a constitutional amendment. This military operation, spending money on it every year, is illegal. It's unconstitutional. This is how derelict and incompetent Congress has been. They can't even write a constitutional amendment to authorize an Air Force, which any idiot can tell you is absolutely essential in today's military reality. Air warfare has controlled the outcome of every conflict since World War I. So, amend the Constitution, put the Space Force in the Air Force, and you'll have legitimate operations. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, what did they do? They destroyed housing for the poor, and they're trapping them in the federal projects. Much better that these operations be turned over to the states to control locally rather than be controlled centrally out of Washington, D.C. by a bunch of bureaucrats who got no idea at all what's happening in Oakland or Atlanta or Houston or Kansas City or Memphis or Chicago or all the other places where it's happening. Transportation. No, I don't think you need transportation anymore. The states can manage things very well. The highway network is built. Federal money can be given to the states to keep the highways, but you don't need a whole transportation department to do that. EPA. Where is environmental protection in the Constitution? The only thing the EPA has authority over is the navigable waterways. That's it. Navigable waterways. Oh, and the lands in D.C. and the forts and territories, forts and possessions and territories. That's it. EPA has no authority in the 50 states over pollution. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. The states are managing that, and if people have a problem, file suit. That's all you got to do is take it to court. The EPA doesn't settle this stuff. It just runs around stealing property and making problems for individuals while ignoring the institutional polluters who have bought them off. OSHA, same thing. Where's the federal government got any constitutional authority over occupational safety? This is a state matter. Energy? Energy's not in the Constitution, and the government is screwing it up big time under Biden. You've just seen the reason why there shouldn't be an energy department. When the government goes stupid and gets philosophically addicted and tries to dictate that everybody abandon the cheapest form there is and start buying the most expensive, most useless forms that can't be stored and make the grid collapse. This is the problem with centralized energy. Get rid of it. Energy should be a matter of the states. Health and Human Services? Where is medicine or health insurance in the Constitution? It's not there. These are state matters. All of the insurance and the health matters are handled under state law. The federal government isn't part of the program. How about the Education Department? Again, it's not in the Constitution. The government has just screwed it up. They're making the lowest common denominator, mandating curriculums that are offensive. They're literally offensive because they don't educate, they indoctrinate. They don't teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. They teach gender dysphoria and critical race theory. Your color is the most important thing, not your mind, not your character, not your soul, not your spirit, not your heart. It's only the color of your skin that matters. Oh my God, Martin Luther King is spinning so fast. He feels like a top. Okay, we're going to keep Veterans Affairs, but we're going to stick it in the Defense Department. We're going to keep Homeland Security, but we're going to stick it in the Defense Department or the State Department. Now, what do you do with all this money that you've freed up by not funding the Interior, the Agriculture, the Commerce, the Labor, HUD, Transportation, EPA, OSHA, Energy, Health and Human Services, and Education? Well, I'll tell you what you do. Every single one of those budget pools still gets allocated by Congress. It should be diminished by 5% every year until we balance the budget. Every single one of those money pools is then divvied up and given to the states to spend on the interior, on agriculture, on commerce, on labor, on housing, on transportation, on the environment, on occupational safety, on energy, on health and human services. You give the money to the states. You don't let the central government spend it from these departments that are wasting it on bureaucracies. Everybody gets their proportionate share of the budget for each agency. And then the states have money to do these things that the central government isn't doing, but is stealing the money to set up oversight boards that do nothing but sit there and watch and take the budget and misspend the money or spend it only where they get political support, like New York, California, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut. Now, the liberal states, where the people who want to spend money spend money. It's not enough that they already get the lion's share under proportionate division under the census, because, of course, the populations are in California, New York, Illinois, and that the red states with much lower populations, Wyoming, Idaho, the Dakotas, etc., get a smaller share. No, they want to control it all. So the solution is to get rid of all this useless, heavy federal weight, start reducing the budget 5%, divvy out the proportionate shares to each state to manage these things within their own state. Some things maybe you eliminate entirely, like interior, or I don't know. Let the states figure it out, right? They're the ones who are supposed to be controlled locally. And this way you get distribution of budget funds to every state in the country to manage their own affairs for all of these arenas that the federal government is not performing in, isn't authorized to be involved in and to control, and never should have been allowed to keep the agency in place once the problem that it was created to address was over. So, there you have it. That's my proposal. And if Donald Trump gets into office, he could actually go ahead and try and do this, because Milieu has shown you the way, and we obviously can't sustain a $34 trillion deficit that continues to grow $4 and $5 trillion every year. It has to be reeled back in. The spending has to stop. You can't take more money out of the people. There isn't the money to take. Main Street is drying up. Higher taxes won't solve the problem. They'll exacerbate it and push us into a depression. You need to cut the spending. You need to cut it quick. I said 5% every year till it's balanced. It probably should be more like 10% a year across the board. And that includes the salaries of the congressmen and senators. Cut everything. The entire budget, 10% across the board every year until the budget is balanced. If you don't do that, you're all going to hell. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation. They're running it out. They're printing it into oblivion, and you will be taken there by them. Right off the cliffs of hell into oblivion with all the other lemmings running down the path to the edge of the mountain to see the sights of the wonderful future. Ah! Whoops. Yeah, whoops. Fix it or we're done. Fix it or we're done. Here's the solution. kill the debt operations, and distribute the money to the states so that they can do it correctly within their own borders. They can manage it better. They know what the problem is. The federal government is wasting the money and has no idea what's going on, is doing nothing but pushing its own philosophical agendas for more and more political and control, economic control of the country. Well, there you got it. We need to cut the government down. And Donald Trump can do it if you give him a Republican House and a Republican Senate. So don't just vote Trump. Vote the whole ticket red if you want your country back, if you want your freedom back, if you want your liberty back, if you want your paycheck back, if you want your jobs back, if you want your quality of life back, if you want affordable prices back. Vote red or you're dead. Vote blue and we're through.